Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate you taking the time to attend our session. Our company is called RFCode. This is actually our first time participating in this event, so we're excited to be here. So I appreciate all the Convergent folks for allowing us the time to present today. My name is Jonathan Luce. I run sales and strategic partnerships for RFCode. And joining me is Marty Johnstone. Marty runs our field engineering team, but I'll let him introduce himself a little later on in the presentation. For today, we're going to go through just a few quick slides to kind of introduce this idea of protecting your assets at both core and edge-based data centers. And then we'll go into a live demo of a software solution that Marty will walk us through. So before we get going, I want to talk a little about our topic. And the topic was critical asset tracking for core and edge data centers. And I want to take a second to kind of to go through how we define data centers, both core and edge. Those terms actually came out of Gartner originally, and core was basically talking about your large scale data centers. This is where the bulk of your computing is take place. And edge has kind of become our marketing term, for lack of a better term, for anything that takes place outside of those core data centers. So not so much talking about colocation or hyperscale, really talking about the enterprise, so the large scale data center and anything that gets attached to that. But for us, edge is not, a Tesla driving down the street or your Fitbit. We're actually talking about remote compute spaces. But with that all said, let's dive in a little bit deeper and talk about how we break these up. So for core data centers, as I mentioned, these are our large scale enterprise class data centers. These are normally standalone brick and mortar locations, or they could be attached on a campus or to a larger building, but they're somewhat purpose built or they've been retrofitted with the right type of power, the right type of cooling to house a whole bunch of compute racks. So we've got racks, we've got servers, but we've also got security personnel, network personnel, management executives. They all tend to congregate around these areas. So they are built to be somewhat very secure right out of the gate. I'm sure anybody who's gone up to a large data center, there's normally a serpentine driveway, with a box to call into, with a gate that opens up. It's got bollards, and then you're met by somebody behind glass that may or may not even have a sidearm with them. But they're built to be very, very secure. There's cameras everywhere. We know the access control is done very, very well, and they are very, very safe. The one thing that they're hardly not is they tend to struggle, and it depends on the company, of course, with automation practices. So with inside those buildings that are normally very secure, there's a lot of practices that happen that are very manual intensive. They're not automated, such as moving assets around from area to area. It's normally an open type environment. It's a very manual intensive type things where mistakes can happen. So we're going to address that a little bit. But for our core data centers, we're talking about those large scale type areas. Now, for edge, let's talk a little bit into that. And I want to talk quickly about a quote from Gartner. So this actually came out in a report in 2017, but it's actually becoming very timely. And at that point, they mentioned that about 10% of all the data that we generate from data centers actually happens in these large data centers, whether it be cloud or enterprise class. But by 2025, which is, we're rolling up in just a few here now, that could be as much as 75%. And the part I want to concentrate on is the quote of vastly decentralized infrastructure. What that means is that we've got all these areas that may not be best suited to house all this compute, but it's probably going to happen anyway. Now, thanks to the wonderful world of marketing and the term edge, a lot of people assume this is what edge is when it comes to data center management. We think of these very expensive, purpose-built prefab buildings that have security, power, network. It's all built as one unit. It gets delivered off of a massive truck, plugs in, and off it goes. And it's a very secure thing. It is definitely edge, and it's definitely very cool. But there's this other part of edge that we don't tend to talk about because it doesn't really fit the marketing lingo, and that's on the far right side over here. This is the edge that's been here for 25, 30 years. There's been many names for it: remote office, back office, IDFs, MDFs, remote compute spaces. There's a lot of terms that we've used for it, but it is edge, absolutely, and it's the biggest edge. In fact, with all of our market research we've done as a company, we've identified probably over 1 million facilities out there that would constitute under this old style of edge. These are converted storage rooms, converted janitor closets, buildings that just get added on to the side of places to house both IT and compute gear, because that part is growing, but the space isn't. And so we see that part of it. Now, what the problem is when you start looking at all these facilities, like in the picture on the right, that looks fairly organized and neat, but it's not always that way. And I'm being a little facetious with this picture, but the point is that we've crawled through enough of these spaces to know that it's really the wild, wild west. And we talk about it being secure. We talk about, it being very, very clean. That's not always the case. And it's not always a situation where access control solves all your problems. So there's other things that you do have to look at. So with it said, let's walk through a few of those problems. So there's really three that we've identified if I want to put them into buckets, right? So we had multiple customer interviews over the years. We've been selling in these facilities for years. And there's really kind of three things that hold people back or prevent or create challenges on how they deploy an edge strategy, specifically around either network or security side of things. One is that all these sites they're geographically disparate. And what that means is essentially they're everywhere. They could be worldwide. And when you have that many locations spread out across the world, you're dealing with everything from different types of altitudes, different environments, from whether being, very hot and arid versus, very wet and muggy. Just all kinds of different things come into play. This becomes very challenging from an administration and a monitoring point of view because you're just dealing with so many variables. The other thing is that there's just nobody there. So a lot of these places, they're either completely unmanned or the people that are there unskilled when it comes to certain types of tasks, especially when it comes to maintaining IT inside of those areas. So what companies are forced to do is essentially create secondary and tertiary type ways to solve problems. And this is usually from a third party that they will parachute in, or they'll have to train someone up there that doesn't have the skill set to be able to help people troubleshoot a few things. So this is a great example of one of our customers got a bunch of retail stores, and the most IT centric person there is the store manager. And they're by no means an expert on facilities, IT, or security, but they kind of have to wear those hats when need be. They have to guide them through those situations. It's not ideal, but that's what they have. But it presents a barrier sometimes. And lastly, they're just not secure by design. I mean, the term insecure actually comes into play, and it's kind of they have to, because in that last scenario I mentioned, you don't want to have all these security things in place when you've got a store manager that's trying to get through to recycle a server. Some of these areas, it's just the little 4 silver buttons on the door handle. That's the code to get inside the room, or it's a lock on a doorknob. That's the security that's been put into place. And they have to do it because they need third parties to be able to get in. They need, as I mentioned, these unskilled labor to go in and solve these areas. And so all these things kind of add up to preventing people from developing an architecture that encompasses both the security side of things, the uptime side of things when it comes to IT, and then the environmental management side, which is on the facility side. So we kind of got these three groups that are responsible for these areas that tend to be going at it. So we kind of talked through what the problems are with Edge. What does an ideal solution look like? And I'm not saying we're perfect, but whenever I start thinking about monitoring these areas, these are the things I think most people should look for. And this is not RFCode specific, this is platform specific. So this could be multiple things out there. But the first is like, how should this work? Like, what's advertised? The first thing is it's got to have real-time information. You need it, at least within a matter of seconds, you're getting data. Batch information that's uploaded twice a day, or if it has to go through a third party, be filtered out, go through other some type of an alarm, coordination architecture, and then get out to somebody. It's honestly, it's just not good enough. The data has to happen right as the alarm is happening. You want to create something that's going to prevent disasters, just not let you know a disaster happened. It's two completely different type things. The next thing is that you want it to be easy to deploy and use. This needs to be able to send out into, as I mentioned, someone who's maybe not skilled with IT or facilities or wiring up security cameras. They need to be able to go put this stuff in very simply so they can start reporting data back to those who are managing it. And then lastly, it's got to be able to be repeatable at large scale. 1 or 2 closets, that's okay. But there are people that have tens or hundreds or thousands of these types of locations where they need this type of monitoring. And it's got to be able to scale up to that, not only from just like a data point of view, but also from an installation point of view. So those are 3 very important aspects. As far as what's in it, what should be there. Well, 1, you got to monitor for unauthorized access. We got to know what's happening. But we also need to know about things like our assets moving around that aren't supposed to. So you want to think about it this way. Not a lot of cameras pointing down inside of a lobby or in a room can tell you if this laptop can leave, but this one can't. Well, the right type of system where sensors working with video could actually tell you, yeah, that laptop can leave and it's okay. This one better stay here. And if it starts to leave, I'm going to let everybody know. And that needs to be automated. And the last is we've also got to protect against environmental hazards. This could be everything from the temperature getting out of whack to us losing power to fluid being detected inside of a room, things like that. So you got to think the presence of a person and the presence of a physical threat that could also harm that equipment. And the last is, you need video integrated into it. So there's got to be video there. And if not for anything, two reasons. One, in the event that somebody needs to deploy a person into that room to find and fix or repair something, having video in that room allows that remote person to see what they're doing and guide them. We've noticed a large trend of IT professionals, not so much security, buying cameras on their own to deploy in these locations for the sole purpose of being able to monitor the equipment. It's not about access control to them. It's not about safeguarding anything other than just allowing them to better monitor the equipment that's inside that area, and to allow these remote people to go in and they can tell them, now go to the third rack to your left. No, your other left, that type of thing. It gives them that real-time visibility inside of there. And then last, what value should you get out of it, right? And so one, it's that early threat detection. So as I mentioned, you want something that's going to tell you a disaster is coming, not that it's already happened. There's a whole lot of people that can tell you something's already happened. We need to get that data up and early. You also need to have that visibility globally, because that's how we see trends, right? So that's how we see across the world or across the state or it happens to be what's happening across these areas. And it allows us to do things a little better, allows us to make better decisions, move inventory around, put extra personnel somewhere, wherever that happens to be. Having that data globally on one pane of glass allows you to do those types of things. And then lastly, it's got to play well with others. You can't just have these siloed systems anymore. They need to be able to feed secondary and tertiary systems. I can speak for RFCode. It is very common for us to integrate into a building management system and to a data center infrastructure management tool, but also feed information out to a VMS system or to a security personnel. It's a very, very common thing for us to do. And those are multiple groups that are working together inside of an organization. So for us, this is kind of the, how should it work? What's in the box when I get it? And what's the value that I should expect? And so if you're evaluating solutions to go monitor these areas, those are the kind of buckets that I would throw things in. Now, before we transition over to the demo, I want to go through a little bit on kind of what our solution looks like. So very simply, what is the architecture? It's not very complicated. When it comes to RFCode, the first layer we have is we create a sensor network. And this is over 433 megahertz, and this sounds geeky, but the reason why we use that technology is that one, it's not Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi is kind of the wild, wild west. But two, it works really well in dense metal and liquid environments. And so metal, you think of a lot of data center racks, secured buildings, scaffolding, all these kind of industrial areas, and water is more people. So the situation is you take a lot of people and put them in a room with our sensors, it's not going to make the sensors act crazy, which a lot of other sensors would, just because of the dense presence of people or metal in those areas. But essentially these sensors, they all last 5 to 7 years from a battery life. They generate data, create data, and they send it up into the air. And once it goes up into the air, it goes to a reader infrastructure. And a reader, you can see on the little monitor that popped up in that icon, that shows essentially what a reader looks like. But this collects all the data. And you deploy about one of these every 3,500 square feet of white space for a data center, and then probably one every about 10 or 12,000 square feet for open air. Any place where you think equipment might move around to, that's where we go place a little reader, and it's networked. One's over PoE, really simple to use. It collects all the data, and then of course it's just a standard TCP/IP connection up to a database. We call our Centerscape, and essentially it brings all of this data in and allows for full administration, reporting, mapping, and then integration out to other platforms. And so that's essentially the platform. Sensors that go out, attach to things, they collect data, send it up in the air to a reader infrastructure. That's networked, and that goes back to software. So a few little deployment photos. This gives you an idea up close. These are just bigger pictures of what I just showed you. But the one in the middle, that's what the reader looks like. It's no bigger than a Cisco wireless device. They're very small. The top right picture is a bunch of asset location sensors on servers inside of a data center. So every asset gets one of these tags on it, and that's what helps us determine the location of the asset. If you rip that tag off, it actually goes into a tamper mode. So we know that someone removed that tag from the server. And then on the bottom, that's a temperature humidity sensor. So that just tells us what the relative humidity and the temperature is inside of that location. So when we combine all this together, we're telling you where something's located, and we're telling you something how it is. So what is the environment around it, and where is it sitting? From the software perspective, here's just a couple of quick screenshots. It's browser based. It does give us that global view. You can actually dive in and get as geeky as you'd like on knowing where assets are inside of a rack, and we can bring in video feeds. We work with access and other kind of cameras. to bring that data in. We don't make or sell our own cameras. We just try to work well with others and then present it through our software and then allow it to be pushed to other locations as well. But Marty will talk a little bit more about that in the demo. All right, so my last couple of slides are just kind of set up as like, how does all this work? So what does it actually look like in production? And I think this is a pretty simple way to go about demonstrating that. So in this situation, we've set up 2 edge sites. So we got 2 remote sites, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast. And inside there, we have some computer racks. Well, the first thing that always happens, and if you remember our layer of architecture, we deploy sensors out inside that environment, and we put a reader in each one of those locations. That way the sensors can gather data and they can send it up in the air and the reader can receive that data. In the event that things start to happen, we start to push this data back into our software. And so here we're going to start to see an example of a temperature alarm. Now this may be a situation where it just gets hot and stops, but in this situation, we're going to see that it's going to continue to rise. And every time that happens, you can actually have a completely different alert action associated with how that goes. So the first level alert maybe goes to a facilities person. The second level alert actually goes to the store manager to go check it out if it's a location at a retail store. Third is now notifying your third-party vendor to go check something out for you. But all that can be scripted and completely automated for you. But at the same time, it's giving you that visibility in the area. And it's not just for things like temperature. So if you look on the bottom right, we've now had a fluid spill. Well, in traditional systems, I wouldn't know if someone spilt a big gulp, kicked over a mop bucket because it's a converted janitor's room, or did an actual pipe burst. I wouldn't have that type of knowledge unless I had that integrated video. Now, in this scenario, marketing may want to look cool as if someone's breaking in. But the point is that we can associate video with non-traditional alerts. Like we know it's very common for like if a door opens up or motion is detected or something like that happens to record video. And obviously that's very standard. What's not so standard is things like if I have power fluctuation, record a video. If I detect heat, if I detect temperature, start recording. If I detect fluid, start recording. Those are kind of non-standard. Those are our bread and butter. And what that's doing is just providing a lot more granular detail and data to the administrators of the system. So not only is it helping with unauthorized access from a video perspective, but we're actually viewing kind of where those unauthorized physical alerts that happen. And then as I mentioned, we like to take that data and we want to report it up to different systems. So that could go up to a data center infrastructure management tool. This could be directly up to a building management system or building automation system, or it could go up to some type of VMS or security-based system as well. So there's just a host of ways that data can lead. And then my last slide would be just a quick use case. How is an example of a customer that's using it? This is a fairly large customer. They have over 1,000 locations globally, and this is going to be big data centers, and this is also going to be a whole bunch of edge sites. And their edge sites are R&D facilities, manufacturing facilities overseas, different corporate campuses. So anywhere where they have IT, they have this technology deployed. It's mainly focused around putting asset location sensors on all of their compute. So they have that real-time visibility. But their goals were, one, they wanted to increase remote and edge locations efficiency. So when they had to do audits, they also wanted to kind of remote bring all this in under one location. They had multiple tools from spreadsheets to different software capture tools. They wanted to kind of bring everything under one umbrella. And they wanted to be able to take the data and feed it out to multiple systems. So they wanted, there's a financial accounting system, there's an ERP system, there's a procurement system, there was a building management system, there was the security folks. They all wanted to leverage the data. Well, after this large scale deployment, which this many locations took a couple of years as they rolled out, we took their total inventory accuracy across globally from 75% to almost 100% visibility of all assets globally. And that's updating that every 10 seconds of the day, every single day. So you have all that information whenever you want it. It also reduced the locating time of their assets by as much as almost 95%. So that's the time that a well-educated, well-paid person is actually going out looking for a piece of equipment when they should be, doing other types of things. And one of the cool things that it did is actually stopped a server switch theft by correlating some tag removals with security video. This customer had noticed one day that they had some tags or some assets that were showing in our part of the data center. And when they went and looked at it, it turned out there was a bunch of tags that had been removed for some switches and that were sitting behind a trash can. And it was kind of that, like, what do I do now? So they called up our support team and we were able to coordinate whenever we saw the assets or the tags move to that part of the building. And then we gave security basically a 30-minute window to go back and pull tape. And they actually identified a person who actually moved the servers onto a cart and then it's going through the security system through cameras out to a parking lot, put them into their car and then drove away with it. And otherwise it wouldn't happen without this type of technology. So all this to say is that when we look at like securing these types of areas, it's not just access control on a camera. There is so much more that we can do as integrators, end users, and vendors to work to create that security architecture that provides more protection on not just the building and the people, but actually the equipment inside of that in several different ways. And so with that said, I'm going to spend probably about 5 or a few minutes, and then we'll do some questions and hand it over to Marty and let him walk you through kind of a live demo, very brief, of what we call Centerscape. So Marty, I'm going to stop sharing and then let you take it over from here.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. So as Jonathan mentioned, I'm Marty Johnstone. I'm a sales engineer here at RFCode. Prior to the RFCode, though, I was a customer. So I was a user of the software and their hardware in particular, and really used this system for about 8 years, solving many different use cases from environmental monitoring to asset tracking and beyond, right? And the biggest thing is, and one thing I wanted to hit on that Jonathan mentioned, right, is that software and the hardware all kind of playing well with others, if you will, in the space, in the ecosystem. And it really does do that. When I was admitting the system, it was easy to go ahead and make this be the solution that you wanted it to be, essentially, and talk to different platforms, BMS, financial, maybe some internal systems. And these were both outsourced and insourced products, right? So this could have been something that we created on our own and pushed that data into those different platforms. And just making that data rich and making everything talk together was a huge benefit factor for us in that point. So with all that, when we look at the edge platform and Centerscape in particular here, we're thinking about things that Jonathan mentioned earlier, right? Which is we're trying to solve for an easy way to look at a large geographic location, looking at it if it's, unmanned. So we have to see, okay, no one is at that location. How do I make sure I'm managing to it and making sure that we're covering anything that were to happen there? And then there is that, it's insecure by design. And so we want to bring some security to that at this point. And so what you see on screen here is the edge platform that we've developed. And so what we're doing is really using that management and exception idea and looking through this to say, if there were a problem, can I be notified or am I notified about it very quickly, right? So if someone were to enter into a location, if that door opens in there, if something happens like it just did, it pops up on screen and we could see that right away. And if I needed to, if that was a very critical facility, I can go ahead and find out why did that door open. Even in more particular, if it's in the example we heard earlier with the retail locations, if it's a back-end office that opens up maybe at 3 a.m, that is something we should probably know to find out, is there something happening within that IT rack in there? Is there some cables being pulled out? Are they pulling the POS systems down? All of these things can happen. And from managing a edge location, those are very critical for us. But you can not only do on the exceptions, but we can also look at the actual location. So if I go ahead and click on this location, I can see here's this room itself. So here's one of our dashboards that we have for this specific room. And so I've got the camera in the middle, and I can tie all this together then with my assets, with my environmental data. Do I have fluid in the room? Are my doors closed? Everything that's encompassing that room, I can pull from this one site dashboard. And not only that, I can pull the live view. So this is actually a live camera view of our demo system within our Austin facility. And so being able to just see all that in real time and update as we've seen is a huge factor. We can come back as well, though, is look at what are the alerts that have been closed? What are things that I need to look at that happened in the past? So let's say we come in the morning and we want to find out who is in our room overnight. And we see we had some motion on the camera yesterday. So I've actually already opened up that video for us. So that video will run and you'll be able to see, well, who actually went in there. So we're taking the snapshot of the event and as we mentioned earlier, tying that event back to what has happened. So door was open, someone walks in, you can see, taking a look at that point. The correlation of those events become critical in the event that you have to troubleshoot that. And in the event that you have to troubleshoot that from a location, that's not the same as your site or the point of the problem. One more thing I did want to discuss. And so from here, you can also go into what does the entire inventory look like? So I can get down to every single asset, every detail in there. And more specifically, I can look at the rack itself. And so I can find out, what do I have in this rack? What does my environmental data look like? How much power am I pulling? Do I have any issues here? From here, I can go into the details itself. So I can click on here and find out what kind of asset it is. And so the idea here is we could start very high and not need to interact, but in the event that you need to, or we need to look at information or data about this asset in particular, is it in the right location? Is it assigned to the location I think it's supposed to be in? And is it picking up there? Or maybe there's information about the device that we need in terms of serial numbers, models. We need to transfer things here or there. It has that ability to be very complex if you need it to be, but also very simple. So with that, I think we're getting close to the time to take a look at some Q&A. Is that right? All right. So let's see if we have any questions on the deck for us.
Suspense is killing me.
Yeah, right. All right, here we go. There we see it. All right, so one of the first questions was, is the software hosted as a solution, or is it a SaaS basically? And so I guess I'll take and answer that one if you don't mind, Jonathan. And so it is a on-prem solution. You can, if you'd like to put that into a, if you want to run it in a cloud of your own private cloud, that's absolutely possible, but it's very lightweight, right? The software is lightweight. It does, have a database in the back end of it, and I can geek out on this for a while, but there is a Postgres or a SQL database that you'd connect to in the back end. Again, typically on-prem for most of our customers, and it helps. What it actually enables them is to be much more secure about it, and so be able to, everything is behind their firewalls, and ends up being the best and most chosen route to deploy. All right, we got another one here. All right, so it looks like we got another one that says, what if the temperature, or if they already have a temperature sensors in their edge or IDF closets, but their security team doesn't allow access to cameras, can they still use this just for asset management? And absolutely they can. So one of the things I really liked about the solution when I was deploying this as a customer was we started out very small. We started as just an environmental opportunity for us, and we went ahead and were able to deploy more sensors and more functionality to it as we moved along. So we were able to learn some things, and when we got to the point of doing asset management and some fluid detection, really was just able to expand very quickly once that initial deployment was completed. Once you have the readers in place, it's really easy to add different types of tags. Our readers can handle any one of our sensors, and so being able to just, once that infrastructure is there, expand at very large multiples and very quickly is a huge benefit for us at that point. Take a look one more time, see if we got anything else. Does not look like it. Cool.
Okay.
All right.
Well, once we're going through that, Marty, well, I'll go ahead and close it out. So everybody, I appreciate you being attentive and paying attention to this session. We were excited to be here, of course. Hopefully we gave you some different insight on different ways that you can apply things outside of standard security personnel, especially to these edge and these remote sites. If you have any more questions, or if you're curious, our website is just rfcode.com. But of course, you can always contact your Convergint salesperson. We work with them very much often, and they can walk you through an RFCode solution as well. So with that said, I'll